All right. Hi, everybody. It's 3:30, which means it's time for one of our after-school STEM shows. I'm Ryan, one of the educators here. And so if you've watched these before, you kind of know what the drill is here. One of the educators from here at the Science Center comes out. We bring some sort of topic to the table that is STEM adjacent: science, technology, engineering, math. And we talk about it and kind of give our perspective on it and try and hit kind of a, quick, easy little time slot to introduce a concept. Today, what we're doing, because something kind of interesting has happened here at the Science Center, is I'm going to be setting up a computer. And if you've been watching these in the past, you know I've set up a few computers for these. But the reason I'm setting up this one is because we actually got some new staff here at the Science Center. We just recently hired a couple new people, and so I'm setting up a workstation that will give them some place to work on a computer when they're here. And so this is going to go at a desk in one of the offices here. We'll kind of figure out the details on it afterwards, but new people, new computer. And so I think both the people we hired are both starting this weekend, right? And yes. So if you come by this weekend, you might see some new faces around. So it's something exciting and new for you. If you're a regular visitor to the Science Center, you can come and, like I said, get some new faces, a little bit new perspective on things. And so what we're starting with here is a computer that we have a lot of here at the Science Center. Is this Antec case with the either 2013 or 2015 or even the occasional 2014 on the front of it. So this is a 2013 one, so it's one of the older ones. And we have a bunch of these that got donated to us a couple years ago. And so these are the computers that most of us have at our stations, at our desks here at the Science Center. And it's kind of nice to have a bunch of the same computer because it means I can kind of swap components out between them really easily whenever we need to. And so I'm going to be setting up one of these guys for our new employees. And so to start, what we'll do is we just got to get this up and running, because right now, like I mentioned last time I was doing one of these builds, when we get new computers in, the first thing I do is I go in and I rip out all the guts out of them that are potentially going to be useful for something else. So that's things like RAM, it's things like hard drives. So I couldn't, even if I were to plug this computer in and press the start button, it wouldn't turn on. So we got to get it to a point where it's going to turn on first and foremost. And so we'll take the side panel off and we'll see what we're looking at in here. So this one, it's not always like this, but this one just has little thumb screws in the back, so I just got to unscrew both of these. And then the side panel should just pop right off pretty quick, pretty simple, pretty easy. Look at that. And now what you should be looking at in there, assuming nothing catastrophic happened to it while it was in the basement, is a CPU fan. So the central processing unit is underneath there. If you remember, was that just last week when I was making the computer for my parents? We had like a big plastic case that was over our CPU, and I said that's kind of a weird thing that they don't really do anymore, where they have this big plastic thing over it that like connects directly to the side of the case. So like I said, this is a little bit newer computer and they don't really do that anymore. So the CPU has its own fan, whereas, like I said, in the one that we made for my parents, there was like a big plastic thing that like went over the top of this and connected right to what would be this fan in this computer, this back case fan. So that's something you're seeing that's a little bit newer, a little bit more modern in that sense relative to the one that I made for my parents last week. But yeah, so you're seeing motherboard here. This is a relatively smallish motherboard. It's a pretty small computer tower. If you buy a bigger computer, you'll get bigger motherboards. And again, if you compare this to one that I made for my parents last week, that one had a bigger motherboard that had more RAM slots in it. And so this one only has 2 RAM slots, which are right here and right here, whereas the one I made for my parents had 4. Big difference between this one and the one I made for my parents, though, besides that, is that this is newer RAM. It's Generation 3 RAM versus Generation 2 RAM. So remember how we talked about how RAM kind of comes in generations, and you can't put old RAM in a new computer, and you can't put new RAM in an old computer? Talked about that last week. So this is of a little bit newer generation of RAM, so it's going to be bigger, faster RAM than what my parents got, even though it's fewer slots. So I think for my parents, what we ended up putting in it was 4 gigabytes of 667 speed RAM. What this one is going to get is going to be 8 gigabytes of 1333 speed RAM. So twice as much, twice as fast, basically, even though it's on half as many slots. And that's what you get with the generation jump. Otherwise, I think we can kind of just hop in. Oh, power supply up here. So when I actually plug this in, this is what I'm plugging it into. This is what's got the port on the back and all the, I'm gonna end up plugging just one cable into the back of here to connect to the hard drive when we get that in. And so, speaking of which, this is the hard drive we're gonna put in there. And so this is a, what would be called a 2.5-inch SSD or solid state drive. Just a little one. It is a 64 gigabyte drive, which for most modern computers probably isn't going to be enough forever. But what we will probably end up doing is putting an additional, little bit bigger hard drive in there. So again, if you remember the computer I put together last week, we had not a little drive like this, we had a big hard disk in there, an HDD versus an SD. And those are bigger and cheaper and can hold a lot more stuff on them. So it's pretty common practice with stuff like this is you install Windows and like all your really important programs on this, but then you also have a hard disk in there, which is where you store like your documents and pictures and stuff like that, just because it takes up a lot more space. That type of stuff takes up a lot more space, and you don't want it eating up all your space on this little drive. So for now, we're just going to put this one in though, and I'll have to track down a different hard drive later to put in there. Like I said, we're just getting it up and running today. And so this computer here has a couple drive bays in it. It looks like it's got slots for 3 hard drives we could potentially put in there if we wanted to. So it's going to slide in here. So there's one there, and then there's actually one underneath here. So you can see this little metal thing coming down. You could stick a hard drive right there and have that work as well. But we're going to put this one on the bottom here. And you can see, maybe you can see, we have these holes here, and those screw holes line up just right with the holes on the side there. So I got a couple little screws here, hopefully the right size. So this one's a little tricky because we're putting a smaller hard drive in than what could possibly fit in this bay. Like I said, the big hard disks are bigger and wider, so this is big enough to fit a hard disk in it. So I gotta kind of hold it in place while I'm screwing these screws in. Big screwdriver. It looks like maybe my screws are a little too big. That's okay, we got lots of screws in the basement. Maybe the screws aren't too big, maybe my screwdriver's just too small. Well, it's not as secure as it could be, but I'll tighten those later. I'm not going to run and find a new screwdriver right now. But it doesn't necessarily need to be battened down to work for what we're doing right here, right now. Alright, next step is we are now going to be attaching our hard drive to our power supply. Hard drive needs power, so we got to attach the power to that, and we are going to be using a this is power cable for a hard drive. You'll see these cables, they're called PCIe cables. So this would be a 6-pin PCIe cable if you were trying to find this. I don't know what the port that the hard drive has on it is actually called off the top of my head. But you'll see these types of cables used a lot inside computers. This is like the standard port that's on the back of a power supply. So you'll see a lot of PCIe 6-pin to X is usually what they're labeled, to PCIe 6-pin to hard drive, PCIe to GPU, whatever. And my power supply is unplugged. So anytime I'm fiddling with the power supply, I always make sure the computer's not just shut down, but it's unplugged as well. And so this is going to be kind of a weird angle to get in at here, because the plugs are kind of deeper in. I got to get up underneath there to actually plug this in. So just going to slide it way up in there. And you heard it snap there. And then I'm going to take this cable here, and you can see our hard drive is just sitting right in here. And then this cable we have is actually, you could plug 2 hard drives into it, so you could have one plugged into this one and one plugged into this one. So we're actually going to have, when we do install a second hard drive, we'll actually already have enough power for it already installed. Just gotta... Did I have it right the first time? I did. There we go. And again, I just don't have it quite as battened down in there as I would like it to be. So it's wiggling on me a little bit, which is making it a little bit challenging to get that plug in, but it's not normally this hard if you have it properly secured. There we go. So now it has power. Next thing we got to do is we got to come up with a way, we got to have a way for that hard drive to send information to other parts of the computer. So it has power, but it also needs to be able to send data. So we got to be able to put stuff onto it, and we got to be able to get access to that stuff and have our computer use it. And so that is what this cable is. This is called a SATA cable, S-A-T-A, acronym. Not sure what it stands for off the top of my head, but SATA. And so that's what our other port is. Actually, here, why don't we just do this since we're not well secured anyway. I'll show you what these look like. So the big one on the left here is the power one, and then this little one on the right is the SATA. And so you can see there's kind of like a little L-shaped piece of plastic on either side of it, and similarly our SATA cable is kind of L-shaped. So snap that on. We'll snap that on, just like that. Now we'll just kind of rest that in the bay there. And then the other part of our SATA cable goes right into our hard drive, and so the location of these is going to change from computer to computer, but it's kind of a distinctly shaped port. Like I said, it's got kind of that unique L shape to it. So you can usually find them pretty easily. Like I said, we have 4 of them in this computer. So I'm going to just find one, and that's relatively easy to access here, and plug it right in. And again, you might have probably heard a snap there that let me know it's in there and secured. And so now our hard drive is fully connected, other than I got to screw it down. Next thing we'll do is we'll put some RAM in it. And remember last time we talked about how when you're using RAM, you have to match the correct generation of RAM. So these have 3rd generation RAM slots in them, which we have plenty of 3rd generation RAM. It's what my basket is here. So it was pens, pencils, and compasses at one point, but I've repurposed this basket to only be all of our DDR3 3rd generation RAM is in here. And so it's not just the generation you want to match though, but you also want to make sure you're matching the speed. And so we actually have a couple different types of RAM in here that are not all necessarily the same speed. Like I said, I'm pretty sure this one that I'm putting in is going to be running at 1333 megahertz. And I'm putting 2 of the same exact stick in, so I know they're going to match. And just from putting together other versions of this exact computer, I know what the rate is that this can do. So different motherboards will be rated for different RAM speeds, so it's something that's worth looking up if you're going to buy RAM, is find the model on your motherboard. So like with this one, it's just printed right on it. H61M-P31G3. And so you could go online and go to, I think MSI made this board. Go to MSI's website and put that figure in, and it'll tell you what kind of RAM it can have in it. And like I said, I know it's rated for up to 1600, but we have 1333 RAM here, so we'll use that. And so I just gotta make sure all the clips are open. And remember, we talked about dual channeling a little bit last week. So that's when you have 2 separate kind of slots for your RAM that kind of work together as though they were one slot. And this has this as well, even though it only has 2 slots total. So ideally, we want to have both these slots filled for maximum efficiency. So like I said before, if you have the option to go with a computer like this, and you can say, okay, I can either get one 8 gig stick, or I can do 2 4 gig sticks, the two 4 gig sticks are going to outperform the one 8 gig stick when you have dual channeled RAM, is the long and short of that. And so those are plugged right in. And that is basically all we're going to do in the guts here, like I said, other than plugging the, or screwing down the hard drive. Like I said, I'll take care of that off screen. Now the next step is let's try and plug it in and see if it works. And so, spin this around actually, go to the back. So what we're looking at here, this is all stuff that's attached directly to the motherboard. Then we have the extender slots down here, which we don't have anything plugged into right now. We don't have any extender slots filled. But that's if you were to have like a graphics card or a Wi-Fi card or something like that, would be poking out the back of one of these. But what we're mainly concerned about here is power, which is up top. Remember I said the power supply is up here, and there's a plug that pokes out the back, so we're plugging this directly into the power supply in the back of the computer here. And then the other thing we're going to be plugging into is our DVI cable. And so this is going to be the cable that we use to attach the computer to the monitor. And then we also need, of course, to be able to actually interact with our computer. So that's what our mouse, which is just plugging into one of these USB ports back here. And any of them will work. We have, looks like 6 USB ports on the back of this computer. So for a mouse and a keyboard, you can plug into any one of them. Every once in a while, you'll run into stuff where you'll have certain, like, you'll have USB ports that are kind of different generations or different speeds too. And you'll want to be mindful of that, but usually they're different colored. So, does this one have footing on the front? No. So like for example, the computer we're streaming off of has 2 USB ports on it that are blue instead of black. And the blue USB ports are USB 3.0, so they're a little bit faster, and some, depending on what you're plugging into, it might need that extra speed, so I like to keep those open. So like the camera and the microphone are plugged into those, for example. Whereas things like mouse and keyboard can plug into just kind of any old one. But we have all of our stuff plugged into the back here. And next, we have to also attach stuff to the monitor. So, like I said, the DVI cable is going to be our sending information between the monitor and computer. And these ones are in kind of a wonky spot. That maybe you can see, maybe you can't, but it's up underneath here. And the monitor also needs power. And so I have a second power cable over on the other side of the table here that I'll grab quick and plug in there. Alright, now I have a little power strip hidden on the back side of the desk here. So I'm going to plug both, the table's on wheels. Going to plug both our tower and our monitor into my little power strip back here. And assuming all goes well, the Dell logo pop up, perfect, means our monitor's working. Let's see if our connection between our tower and our monitor works. So I've got the power button on my side here, but just press it here. Oh, classic issue, forgot to turn the power supply on. I think I do it literally every time I've done a computer thing. I forgot to turn the power supply on. So there's a little switch back here where you can turn the power supply on and off. For our older fans out there, might remember that a lot of computers used to just have this switch, and that's how you actually turn the computer on and off. Nowadays, it's a switch that you turn the power supply on and then you turn the computer on. Label, it's become a two-step process. So we have power, because my lights came on up here. But we seemingly are not getting oh, there's fans just kicked on too. That's my okay, that's good. Are we getting anything over here? Not yet. So case fan just kicked on over here and CPU fan just kicked on. It took a little second to actually work, which is a little bit interesting. Maybe we've got a loose cable in there somewhere that needs to be reattached. But what we should hopefully be seeing here is what we would like to see is a black screen that has some white text on it. But we're not quite seeing that. And that tells us that something is up as far as our connection between our tower and our monitor. I'm going to grab a new cable. We're going to see if that's the problem. We'll be back in 20 seconds.
So, for our guests and visitors, this is Lee Furseth from the Headwater Science Center. I'm on the other side of the camera, and while Ryan's picking up a cable, we'll just tell you about the Science Center. We are open Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. That's Friday, Saturday, and Monday, 9:30 to 5:30. We open our doors at 9:30, except on Sundays. Sunday is the day that we wait till 1 o'clock, and then we stay open until 5:30 again. And so that's the days we are open. I hear Ryan coming back. He's entering into screen. So what do we do on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday? We do field trips and groups. Yes, a field trip is a group, but it's specifically about school. And then we do groups as well. So if you represent either a school and you want to have a field trip here, or you represent a group, give us a call. We schedule them as a private field trip. In other words, you're the only ones here. And then we take care of our building immediately after that, get it all ready for whether it's another group or it's for the next day. So that's our current hours, and feel free to give us a call. Back to you, Ryan.
Yeah. And so what I'm testing out here is seeing if our issue is with our cable or either of our ports. So I'm kind of testing both at once, which isn't necessarily great science because I'm testing two separate variables at the same time. So if this works, I'm going to have to do more testing to figure out if it was the cable that's the problem or one of the ports on the back. But what I'm swapping out for, I'm getting rid of our DVI cable, and I'm swapping it out for a VGA, which does the same thing. So the VGA is a little bit older. It's an analog signal versus a digital signal. But for timeliness' sake, oh no. Let's swap the ends, because this one, I can't fit that on the back of our monitor because it's shaped kind of weird, but it should work if I just flip the ends around. And that's something that's good to know with these two, is that it's the same plug on either side, so there's not necessarily a right side and a wrong side to plug into your computer versus your monitor with these types of cables. Like I said, this one's just kind of shaped a little bit weird on the end, so it doesn't fit on this particular monitor, but that's just about the plastic that's around it. It's not anything to do with the actual connection. Alright. And what I'm expecting to see, if everything works, is we should get a black screen that says something like boot device not found or something like that. Is what I'm kind of expecting to see when I turn on this computer. Because I think that hard drive I put in there doesn't actually have Windows installed on it. Turn the power supply on. CPU or memory changed. That's good. So our problem was solved there, where we are now getting a signal from this to this, because it's asking me about hardware that has changed. I'm just gonna, what it's saying is CPU or memory changed, please enter setup to configure your system. Press F1 to run setup, or press 2 to load default values and continue. I'm gonna press 1 to run the setup, and this should probably take us into BIOS. The basic input-output system. I looked up what that stood for since last time. And again, we have BIOS. And so what we're looking at here, can we read this at all?
Pretty tough.
Pretty tough. Yeah, I can get in there tight. I just need to get one hand on here for the mouse arrows. So, if you remember last time, we were having a couple issues in BIOS. And the big issue we were having was that the battery for our BIOS was dead. And you might think that's kind of weird that your computer needs to have a battery in it. but you think about your computer is doing stuff even when it's turned off. And it even has to do stuff even when it's unplugged. So a good example that you can immediately look to is like your computer, even if you unplug your computer and plug it back in, it still knows what time it is. The clock still keeps going. And so your little BIOS battery is what keeps that. So that BIOS battery is what saves your settings. Like I said, the most visible one is probably the clock that's in there. And that was dead, so that's why we weren't able to boot before on the one we made last week. Everything seems to be working fine here. Like I said, we have a date and a time here. If we go down here, you can see our SATA ports. And so you can see we have 4 SATA ports in here, just like I said. And I have nothing plugged into 1. 2, it says a whole string of characters there, and that is our hard drive that we plugged in. So that's telling us that our hard drive is plugged in correctly. It's powered and getting read by the computer. So that's in port 2, and then port 3 and port 4 are both empty also. And then this is just a bunch of the other kind of stats for the computer. Actually, here's another one. The physical memory is... oh, here we go. So here's our RAM that we talked about. Remember that we talked about the RAM frequency. So it says 1333 megahertz, which is exactly what we're hoping to see. And does it say how many we've got in it? Doesn't say how much RAM we've got right there, but I can probably find that in here somewhere if I looked around a little bit. Yeah, whatever. The other kind of interesting thing with this menu is at the top it says overclocking. And that is something that we haven't talked about before with any of our computers, because the computers around here that we have can't do it, other than maybe the one that we're streaming off of. And actually, since we've upgraded it, the one that I edit video on would now technically be capable of overclocking as well. And so overclocking is a way that you can get a little bit more performance out of your computer, but it tends to come at the expense of efficiency. So when you overclock your computer, it's going to run a little bit hotter, it's going to use a little bit more power, but you're going to get a little bit more performance out of it. And so I mentioned that we're going to be running our RAM at 1333 megahertz. Our motherboard can technically run this RAM at 1600 megahertz. It could run it a little bit faster, but the processor we have in it isn't capable of doing that. So if we were to upgrade the processor, we could also make our RAM run faster too, but because we have the lower end processor in it, we can't do it. So it's going to run at 1333, even though our RAM is technically could be overclocked up to 1600. But yeah, the other thing that I'm looking at here is boot, is what this menu is titled. And so this is the boot order. And this is really important for setting up a new computer, because this hard drive I don't think has Windows installed on it. And so it doesn't really have a way to actually start and run anything. And so you can see first boot. So the first thing it's going to check and see if it can boot off of is a USB stick, which is perfect. That's exactly what I want it to say. The second thing it's going to try and boot off of is the hard drive that we put in there. Perfect. Again, I want that as my second option. So in the absence of a USB stick being plugged in there, it'll try and boot off the hard drive, is what that says. And in the absence of a USB stick or a hard drive, it'll try and boot off of a CD, etc., 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 a bunch of different options down there. Like I said, I don't have Windows installed on that hard drive, I don't think. So I think if we go to exit our settings there, oh wait, it apparently does have Windows installed on it. Maybe, we'll see. Said I prepared a USB stick that has Windows 10 on it to actually install Windows 10 on this, but it might actually already have it.
Okay, it's saying preparing automatic repair.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing to be coming up on this. That probably means that we maybe don't have a fully functional version of Windows on here. Maybe something is a little busted with this version of Windows, which is maybe why this hard drive wasn't in a computer anymore. So even if it does have Windows on it, it'd probably be worth my while to wipe it and reinstall Windows anyway. If it is a little goofed, but we'll see if it actually does go into it or not. And sometimes it'll just get caught in loops of this. If it really is kind of messed up, it'll just kind of try an automatic repair and fail and try and repair again and fail and eventually be like, I can't do this, I quit. And we're not going to sit and watch through all that because it can take like hours sometimes, where it'll just keep catching itself in that loop. Which it looks like that's probably what's happening here. So I'm probably going to end up reinstalling Windows on this anyway. But interesting that it already had an install on there, even if it was a broken... Oh, there we go. Went faster than I thought it would. And so, let's actually try this. So, Windows 10 is really convenient. You can just go online to Microsoft's website and make a flash drive that has a Windows installation on it. The big limiter is it has to be at least a 20 gigabyte flash drive. So it's a big-ish flash drive, you know, bigger than you might just have laying around necessarily, but they're actually pretty cheap these days. And so what I'm going to do is take this one that I know has a Windows install on it, because I just made it right before we started today, plug it into one of these USB ports in the back. Actually, remember we were talking about how different USB ports are different colors and the blue ones are USB 3.0. So this is a flash drive that could go in a USB 3.0 port, but you can still plug a USB 3 device into a USB 2 port and it'll work. It's just not going to run as quickly as it potentially could. So we're just going to plug in one of our ports back here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit our reset button on our computer. I'm just going to restart it. And hopefully what should happen is it'll look at that and say, aha, I have a USB stick plugged into me. I'm going to try and boot off of that rather than the hard drive. Seems like that's not what's happening though, which is a problem. I swear, nothing ever goes smoothly for me in these. I always get them figured out afterwards, but during the actual presentation, nothing ever works exactly right. That's how it goes sometimes. Like I said, that's why troubleshooting is a thing. Let's go to advanced options. All right. So what I told it to do there is try and do a fresh reinstall of Windows, and it said, nope, can't do it. Which is a hassle. But as I said, something that I'll need to futz with a little bit and figure out. And so, I hate to leave you on a cliffhanger like this, like I have with every single one of these computer ones, it feels like, where we get to a certain point and I'm like, if everything works right, it'll work, and then it never does. But, hey, like I said, that's how it goes. That's why some of this stuff can be kind of tricky. That's why I try and do these types of presentations, is to show that this can be tricky, but it's not insurmountable. You know, we went from a computer that was a paperweight to one that, you know, with a little futzing is going to be up and running and being a fully functional computer for, like I said, and actually used around here at the Science Center for somebody in, what's it been, maybe half an hour at this point. And that's with me chatting and talking and running around and not really even trying to be quick about it. So yeah, this stuff's not that scary. It's not that complicated. Stuff can be a little futzy sometimes, but you know, I would highly encourage, you know, if you've got old computers laying around, go ahead, crack them open them up, futz around with them, see what comes unplugged, what plugs in easily, what does what. It's a really interesting thing to get involved in, and it's really handy. It's something that I fully wish I would have started kind of getting into more when I was younger, is learning how the inner workings of these things work, because it's something I've kind of had to learn on the fly as I've entered the professional world, to figure out how to actually make these things work. And a lot of that was just because I was kind of scared to do it up until relatively recently. And I spent a lot more money on like computer repairs and stuff like that than I probably actually needed to, because I was scared of doing this type of stuff myself, and it's really not that complicated for the most part. So yeah, I guess that's the takeaway here is computers don't need to be scary. They're only as scary as you let them be. They're only as complicated as you let them be. And so if you got the time and energy and willingness to learn about them, there's a lot of interesting stuff there. And like I said, it's not that complicated, most of it. But I think Lee already told you the hours that we're open. It sounded like he was already telling you about field trips. Tomorrow is Friday, right? Yeah. So we are open tomorrow, so come swing by. We're open 9:30 to 5:30. As far as the 3:30 show tomorrow, might be me, might be Chuck. We'll see. But yeah, if you come swing by at 3:30, we might even have you as a live audience here for the show. You might get to participate, might get to volunteer, depending on what we're doing. And hopefully we see you tomorrow. I like doing these for live audiences. It's very engaging for me, more so than talking to the camera. I like my digital audience as well, but the live audience is a little different.